Kia ora koto. Welcome back to our Activist in Residence program with Catherine Delahunty, to our audience in Palmerston North, in Aotearoa, and across the globe. Welcome. It's been such inspiring couple of days to be spending with Catherine, talking about her broader work on anti-capitalism and how that intersects with the work that she does on anti-racism and Te Tiriti education. So today, as Catherine delivers her public lecture on replacing colonialism and capitalism by lunchtime, I just wanted to again offer a brief introduction to those of you, particularly globally, that are joining into this particular stretch of conversation. Catherine is an activist with a lifetime of experience working within the context of activism that resists the extractive industries, particularly her work on mining in Aotearoa is really powerful. And this connects with then the ongoing the work that she's participated in terms of challenging racism. What I find really powerful in Catherine's work is the ways in which she centers anti-colonial resistance to the work of challenging capitalism. And there is so much really to think through in terms of what she has to offer us. In addition, Catherine served in the New Zealand Parliament. She entered the Parliament in 2008 and remained within the Parliament as a vocal advocate, working on issues of anti-racism, on issues of climate justice, and on issues of social justice in international contexts. Catherine continues to do her work with trust called Kotare Trust that does the public pedagogy of building resources really in communities on social justice and creating those transformative spaces. And looking forward to this conversation with you, Catherine, today. So welcome.
Kia ora. Nā mihi nui ki te tangata whenua, Ngāti Rangitane ki Manawatu, Ngāti Raukawa me Ngāti Kauwhata. He mihi nui kia koutou katoa. He mihi nui ki te whānau o care. Thank you very much, Mohan, for the kind introduction. Thank you for coming to my lecture and for listening across these spaces. I love to be able to reach people across the world, but also to see them in person is wonderful as well. I firstly want to acknowledge this is the 10th anniversary of the CARE organisation Activist in Residence program, and I'm very privileged to be here because this organisation, as I've been learning this week, is transformative, it is community-based, it is accountable to the marginalised, and it works with people beyond the walls of the academy in a powerful way. And I, as someone who has dropped out of the academy at the age of 20, after doing half a degree and went to the bush, I value my friends who managed to stay in this setting for the research, the powerful research that they can do that gives tools to the rest of us who are fighting for change. So thank you, Care. I really appreciate you. And also to acknowledge and mihi to all the activists who've participated in this wonderful program, which Dr. Mohan Datta has been so important in, not just in this country, but elsewhere. All of you who have been here, whose steps I walk in, amazing people, starting with my friend Sue Bradford, who was the first, but all who have continued. We activists need each other, but also need our colleagues in many sites of power. That's how change occurs, when we work across sites of power to change the world. So I called my talk, in a moment of frivolity, I called my talk Replacing Colonial Theft and Capitalism by Lunchtime. And I chose those words for a reason. I chose the word replace because as somebody that believes in revolutionary change, I think we really need a vision of where we're going, and we really need to replace what is wrong without creating yet another patriarchal revolution event. Revolutionary thinking is not an event, It is a process which requires constant reflection and accountability. So that's why I chose the word to replace those structures. But also I said by lunchtime because I'm aspirational. Actually, it's lunchtime in about 5 minutes. So where we stand here in Papaoia. But I wanted to inject a sense of urgency in what we're talking about. We all know that we face multiple crises, but there is a tendency to believe, particularly amongst Pākehā culture, which is where I'm a Pākehā of English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, India descent. But we have so much privilege that we believe we have time to go on the journey. This constantly happens when I'm teaching, when I'm challenging people about racism, colonialism, and abuses of Te Tiriti or Waitangi in my country. Pākehās will say, oh, well, I just need to take baby steps. This is very confronting, and I need to go on the journey. And it's like, for 170 years, these people have been waiting for us to stop the journey and start committing to action for justice. So I guess I want us to feel a sense of urgency. Today, I opened my Twitter feed and saw a story about wealth distribution on this planet. And it said, it was an Oxfam index that showed that in this country, Aotearoa, that we come out of, in terms of fair wealth distribution, Aotearoa is 136 out of 161 countries. And we should be ashamed of that statistic. Those of us who live with the benefits of white privilege and colonisation and the benefits of hyper-capitalism in our country. And that's why these things are all connected. Whether we are fighting to stop the extraction of resources or whether we're fighting to basically make sure people have enough to eat and some shelter, these issues are all interconnected. And in my work for change, what I have learned painfully, having been raised a fundamentalist Marxist with very little sense of intersectionality, is that we marginalise people if we do not recognise the interconnections between all of these sites of struggle and these sites of justice. So we have work to do in terms of understanding each other and supporting the people who are not heard in the dialogue about change. So what for me is so obvious is that the crisis that we have in what I call the 3 C's. So the C words, colonisation, capitalism, and climate change, all are seen as separate crises, but in fact are utterly connected. Climate change is a symptom of those other 2 processes, and those other 2 processes cannot be separated. To address colonisation, we must address capitalism, because capitalism is the parasite that has benefited from the imperial colonial history that is not over. Alongside the 3 C's, I also want to talk today about the P word, patriarchy. Because when you dehumanise more than 51% of the human race and reduce them to a servant class, alongside all the other people you're marginalising, there will never be a truly human society. I remember in my maiden speech at Parliament saying that I wanted to live in a world where children and women came first. And I cannot even imagine, having grown up in this society, what that looks like. And that is a terrible thing to have to admit. But to imagine a world which puts children and women first, that puts marginalised voices first, that recognises the diversity of human beings while acknowledging the colonial impact in this country of Indigenous survival. All of those issues are connected, and all of my practical experience as an activist has taught me that we can address them all at once, and we must address them all at once, or we will not build lasting and justice-based change. And I love the word care, which the Care Centre has made into a meaningful idea for me this week, particularly because when you read the book The Caring Economy by Rian Eisler, you will see that we have allowed economic ideas through colonialism and capitalism to be reduced to some kind of white male number. But the care economy and the caring view is that we need to make the activities we do to survive subject to the needs of people, and starting with the most needy. the most vulnerable and the most important people in our world. But not just that, what about the world itself? Because as Indigenous people have taught me, and I learned this painfully as an activist fighting mining, is that we're not doing this because we're separate from the earth and we are going to make use of it, or we're going to turn it into a museum. That's the conservation story. But what we need to do is recognise that tangata whenua in all countries, Indigenous people live in right relationship with the natural world as well as each other. That's the goal that we have cut across with a colonial project, which is to extract resources and dump toxic waste onto the bodies of people. So the 3 C's, and then the P, the patriarchy. I want to tell a few stories, because stories are more powerful than lectures and rants about ideology. I was raised in ideology. It has its place. We need to have structural thinking or we won't change structure. We'll think that it's all individual, and that's a toxic neoliberal meme. But we do need to acknowledge, the story is where humans have always lived. Around the fire, listening to the story is where we discover our place in the world. And I guess one of the stories I want to talk to you about in terms of colonisation is yesterday I met with somebody, thanks to CARE, I met with somebody who was mana whenua, tangata whenua of this rohe. And she told me a modern colonial anecdote. Because if we think colonisation is historical and that it's something in the past that needs to be fixed, we're not facing the reality of the mutating virus, which is colonial capitalism today. And her story was that in their own whenua, they've managed to get some of their land returned, but the 10-acre block where they intended to build the papakainga, the council is now saying, well, you can have one house on that land. It's basically another form of colonisation when you force people to beg the Crown for what is already theirs and then deny them the right to recreate their own community except on our terms, the terms of the coloniser. And that's what we've done. And that's what we continue to do in this country, is to set the terms for the discussion that the thief is telling the victim of theft how the resources that they've stolen will be partially returned and then managed according to the thief's rules. And it's pretty simple. You know, basically for me, and I think the Te Tiriti settlements make a good case, it's basically we stole your car and then you can prove that the broken hubcap from your car is yours and not your neighbour's broken hubcap. And then if you do get the hubcap and you have proven to our satisfaction that it's yours, then you must follow our rules about how you use it. That's ongoing colonisation. I guess as an internationalist working on issues like Free West Papua too, I see colonisation is still happening in its very crudest forms as well. The Indonesians are literally mowing down communities and forests in West Papua, the lungs of the Pacific, in order to extract resources, in order to build and allow corporatism to take over customary land. And that's happening every day, and you can't get anybody in the international community except for from the West to actually take that seriously, even though West Papua is 1 hour away from Darwin, Australia. And our governments, Australia and the New Zealand so-called government, are culpable in colluding with that form of colonisation that's happening right now. And most people don't know about it because journalists aren't allowed in West Papua. So these things are all connected, and if as an activist we actually want to live with authenticity and accountability, we can't say, he tohu. Shall I stop, Richard?
Yes, probably.
I'll just wait for my guidance.
Yep, keep going.
So we cannot separate these things. And the signs are everywhere. The signs are everywhere that our ecosystems are breaking down, that our social relationships have been distorted into massively unequal attacks on community life, and that the models we have in the West are not the answer. So talking about climate change, for example, which is a result of both capitalist hyper extraction for the benefit of the elite and colonisation, the solutions will not come from the West. And Westerners have gone for and opted for, and this goes right through, the Greens in Parliament are doing the same, the techno fix, the profit motive. We can make money out of climate change. It can be an opportunity. All we need is some entrepreneurial spirit based on Western Elon Musk individualistic success fantasies. I can't even look at them. And instead, people of the global south, people in this room who come from parts of the global south, know more about the experience of living with the reasons for climate change, the effect of climate change, which they did not cause, but they have more ability to adapt because their cultures are not based on extreme wealth inequality, extreme wealth, and their cultures are not based on a complete disconnection from the land. Now, I'm not romanticizing it. Of course, there is huge disparity in other parts of the world than in the Western world. But if we're going to listen to the voices of people who have genuine solutions and connections to the earth, it will be the indigenous networks across the planet, and it will be the global south solutions. It will not be the West. And for us, that's a huge challenge because we're used to, our solutions to climate change, our COP20 whatever meetings, are another form of colonial imposition. I want to make a shout out to my friend Ralph Regenvanu, who's an opposition leader in the Vanuatu. And Vanuatu have taken the Western countries to the International Court of Justice on climate change because their country has already suffered extreme economic impacts from typhoons, cyclones created by something that they did not have responsibility for. And he quite rightly is sheeting that home to the people who have created the problem. But how do we halve energy in the next 50 years, which is actually what we have to do? We have to replace the oil economies. How do we do that? The only people we can ask is the people who already live with different climates and understand what is happening, who live in the front line of climate change. The communities at the absolute flax-rich grassroots level who are facing either their marae going underwater on the coast or their village in Bangladesh that is always underwater but now has more water. So these people are the people who can craft the solutions to these three intertwined crises of colonisation and climate and capitalism and what we're going to do about it. So, you know, there is it could be seen as a very dark scenario, but what I'm feeling particularly this week is that our ability to find ways through this is not a blueprint. And for someone coming from the left, I think we've always been brought up with this idea of the blueprint. This is the blueprint, this is the solution. Let's just market it to the people and we'll fix the world. Except we'll probably fight amongst ourselves, and we've also got to deal with the rise of fascism and the rise of, in this country, of the middle of the road right-wing governments who are actually accessible to fascism, who are not middle of the road, in fact they are far right. So, and then our left, so-called left in this country, our so-called progressive government that people around the world claim to be a superstar, is actually a neoliberal, business as usual, timid, populist government. So don't look to governments right now in the Westminster system and the majoritarian system, because the majoritarian system is based on excluding the voices of the marginalised, who actually have the solutions if we're prepared to be accountable to them and listen to them and work with them at the community level. So for me, it's a great privilege to be out of Parliament and to be in the community and to actually be working in those spaces. But I just wanted to tell a couple of stories about the three C's. I guess I told one about colonialism, the ongoing colonialism of the way Māori land is being marginalised post-treaty, supposedly. Treaties, as the great Warner Jackson said, treaties should be honoured, not settled, so we cannot ever stop the dialogue in this country around Te Tiriti justice. But in terms of capitalism, I also had the painful privilege of working with a group of sawmill workers in the Bay of Plenty, Aotearoa, on the northeast of the east of this island, Te Tiriti. And the sawmill workers were poisoned in their workplace, in the forestry processing industry. They were poisoned up till 1980 by a chemical called PCP, pentachlorophenol, which is riddled with dioxin, like the Agent Orange that was produced over in Taranaki, not far from here. And these men who worked in the sawmills, their very bodies became the toxic waste dumps for capitalism's profit. So the board mill, the pulp mill at Kawiro, and the mills right across this country that processed timber were using a chemical that was literally contained the most dangerous cancer-causing chemicals in the world. And then all of that waste product, because the men had to dip the timber in these baths of this chemical, went into their bodies, then they took their clothes home and their wives washed their clothes and it went into their bodies. So it went into their children. It's an intergenerational problem. And these people started to die and they didn't know why. And so you would think health people would be worried? No, they were in denial. You would think the unions would have been their champions in a very, very moderate and individualistic way, not in a coherent way. These men organised themselves into forming a group with their whānau, Māori-led, but inviting all workers, and they formed a group that started to fight for the recognition of their experience. And it has been my extreme privilege to work with them for the last 20 years. And we're still working on basics like ACC won't recognise that they need to be included for care. If you get a rugby injury in this country, you get everything. If you get poisoned at work by a chemical that people don't want to talk about, you get nothing. Oh no, we marched on Parliament and we got a free doctor's visit to the GP once a year for these people. Where are the companies that poison this community? Not just their bodies, but their lands, their marae. They dump the waste, the toxic contaminated sites all across the Bay of Plenty and other places. They haven't been cleaned up yet, but I did manage to get a register of the worst when I was in Parliament, and there is a process, a slow process for cleanup. But that's how capitalism has worked. It extracted from those men's labour a price that their families, whānau, continue to pay. Infertility in women is absolutely chronic in this situation when exposed to these chemicals. Loss of babies, miscarriage. There are so many of these stories about polluting the earth. We face a chemical crisis at the same level as the climate and biodiversity crisis. So there are so many of these stories. But I want to talk a little bit, before I finish, about, I mean, these are tragic stories, but my life has been inspired by the people I've worked with who are not tragic. They are powerful. They are way beyond ignorant, and yet they have never been to a university. But they understand power, and they understand organising, and they understand, as tangata whenua, what respectful activism looks like. And I have learned so much from these people. And so, you know, they are just one very good reason that we need to get rid of capitalism, at least by afternoon tea, if not lunchtime. There's no accountability for those companies. They all went broke, they disappeared. They've made their money. That's all that matters. So what do we do? So for me, what we do is, it is not about one person. I have no blueprint. I have no big solution. I have nothing to market. But in relationship and dialogue, we will find our way to rehumanize the West and to listen to others and to uphold the leadership of Indigenous people. And to do that, there are some things we need to do. We need to educate ourselves about the real nature of what is economics, because we have actually handed economics over to some treasury and some banks, and therefore we've lost our power. Everybody, particularly in their home, particularly in their community, if they're struggling on low incomes or benefits, they are economic experts. And we need to acknowledge the expertise of the people with so-called nothing who actually understand the world, and they need to be acknowledged and respected for what they know and what they can bring to this conversation around solutions. You know, I want to hand the country over to 7 Māori women because, you know, they know how to feed hundreds of people on marae, they know how to meet multiple goals. One of my friends is a teacher and she teaches a model which is that tangihanga is the last non-corporatized ritual in this country. And I just want to shout out to Kay Robin, Ngāi Tamanuhiri, for the honour of working with you and witnessing your profound understanding of power. And so what Kay, when she and I were working in Politics, were teaching students was that you don't need corporate hierarchy. All you need is a community that understands the valuing of everybody. And so with tangihanga, from the paipai to the ringawera to the hangi, everybody has their role, everyone learns no one's the boss, no one tells you what to do, everyone knows what to do. Well, the aunties probably do tell you what to do, but that's understood. That's what aunties are for. I'm looking forward to this role. In my own culture, well, we don't really recognise the value of older women, but look out, because we're going to let you know. So, tangihanga has multiple functions. From what Kay said, she acknowledged the students in her class already knew this, but what they didn't know was that this was what was worth fighting for. That we don't need a corporate, outcomes orientated, bureaucratic or corporate structure to tell us how to be sophisticated practitioners of our cultures. And so it's very inspiring for people to realise they already have it, they already do it, and just to value it, because when the coloniser says your way of dealing with these things has no value, that's a direct attack on your identity as well as your cultural rituals. So there are people already practicing sane, human, and beautiful ways to be community. Right across Aotearoa, and I know right across the world, I see these every day. And yet we don't talk about them because our media is more interested in celebritising and fetishising wealth. But to actually acknowledge what is happening, let us just look around us and go, what happened during COVID at Matakawa in the Te Tiriti, when the government, who offers no healthcare to these people, basically, wasn't going to deliver, Tina Ngata and the community, the hapu and whānau at Matakawa, developed, they fundraised, they bought a van, and they went to every whānau and they gave people kai, and they gave people vaccines, and they gave people information, and they just managed, whether it was dark or light, they managed to provide safety for their community, and they got recognised and they won awards for that, because that community already knew how to be a community, and they knew no one was coming. There was no white man on a white horse that offered them anything. They knew what to do. Think about Parihaka, just over here to the west. The inspirational home of non-violence, and how they are a wonderful community that, despite the Crown, and I went to the Crown apology, and I saw how pohara it was in terms of material resources, but how powerful in spirit. Parihaka is a gardening place. It is also the home of non-violence that people from all over the globe come to. It's a taonga to our nation, and it's a way forward. I think about a little project called Common Unity in Lower Hutt, where out of a school, refugee, migrant and tangata whenua community have built incredible gardens and amazing food programs and reuse programs, and encouraged small micro enterprises to all kinds of people who had no work, and have built this as a community through sharing kai. And right across this country, people are using sharing kai, growing kai, distributing kai as an opportunity for rebuilding community. And I have faith that from that, so long as we're prepared to have the hard conversations about power and really listen to what these people know about power, we can find ways through this. But we have to listen differently, those of us who come from the privileged, so-called educated West. We have a different listening to do. And we're not very good at that. We have to learn to follow on environmental issues rather than think we are the leaders on these issues. These are shifts and transformations. The greatest inspiration to me as a teacher, when I'm teaching Te Tiriti to thousands of citizens who have absolutely no idea of the truth about this country, is Matike Mai. So Matike Mai, as many of you will know, is a vision that was created by tangata whenua through hui and wānanga and visiting prison and visiting teen parent units and listening to the people about how they would like to be governed. So tangata whenua produced a vision for 2040, 2050, led by the incomparable Dr. Moana Jackson, who we lost on March the 31st this year. And I just want to mihi to all those who still feel that loss, all of us who still wake up every day without Moana Jackson, but we still have his legacy. Also to Dr. Margaret Mutu and Dr. Veronica Tawhai, who was at Massey University for a while, who are all great leaders and catalysts, but whose greatest skill is to listen to the people. And so they've created a vision that they want a response from non-Māori, from tauiwi, from tanga Te Tiriti, who we should be, as to how we should govern this country. And their suggestion is that there's a rangatira space. Let's get rid of the Westminster violent patriarchal white thing, whatever it is. I was there for 9 years, it doesn't work. Let's get rid of it. Let's create something better, rangatiratanga space, that they will, they have every capacity to manage in this country. And then based on Te Tiriti and he whakaputanga, tanga Te Tiriti need to get our house in order. And that means changing our house. I don't think our house works for us, let alone for anyone else in terms of, and what it tells you is that capitalism and colonialism cannot be the basis of our house anymore, because we have done enough damage and many people are not benefiting as a result of these processes. So it's an act of reimagination. And you know, what Moana always said was, if you have to imagine it first. You know, people are very good at saying, we can't do these things. But change comes from the margins, not the center. It comes from the visionaries and hope builders in the communities at the edge. It doesn't come from people who have high status and power. We, you know, those of us with that kind of status and power can't be trusted to have an investment in change, because we benefit from the status quo. So Matike is a wonderful opportunity for this country. Matike is an opportunity for us to have the conversation and to reimagine the world and to listen to the voices of people who are not heard. I also just want to talk briefly about intergenerational dialogue, because I think that's where change is going to come as well, is through the meeting of the generations, through the freshness and openness of the younger generation and the experience and dedication of the older generations. In my culture, we don't talk across the generations. You know, we fetishize youth while not giving them any power, and we send our old people into loneliness. And we all need to be part of this, and the conversations that we can have across the generations and across the cultures and across the genders and across the so-called able-bodied, ignoring the disabled, which is a whole other korero, which is about power and about what is valuable in our society. We need to have that conversation together. And yes, there are different styles with the generations and different preoccupations. But at heart, what the 19th and 20th century West did give us was a rigorous class analysis. And class has not disappeared. It's obvious, you know. At the same time, alongside that class analysis, in the 21st century, we have realized that culture and all of the issues associated with culture have to be present. I spent my entire youth in left-wing white people's meetings dominated by men telling me how to think. And it wasn't a liberating experience. But what I did realize is that at the heart of that analysis, the issues of economic power must be addressed. But we need a more creative model. We need a model that recognizes not only the marginalized voices, but where do we get our life from? It comes from the earth. It comes from the sky. Indigenous people, they don't separate themselves, but the West, we have imagined those things to be separate from us. And in that imagining, we have destroyed the sources of life. It's actually a suicide mission. And even the richest elite with their absurd lives are going to end up, I guess they can go move to the moon and live in a silo with Elon if they want to. I mean, sometimes that seems quite a good idea. But actually, we need a different take a different act of imagination. There are so many things that I see from Parihaka, from common unity, from Ihimātao, where I was privileged to be, a gardening protest based on holding the land through gardening and feeding the community, which they're still doing while they wait for the Crown to recognise that this has always been their whenua. I'm so inspired by all of these things. I'm in a little group myself in my area that is based on big allyship and being an accomplice to the amazing leaders who are working the Māori women's space against violence, but are recognising that until we house the people and feed the people, it's very difficult to move out of violence because it's an internalised model that comes from colonial capitalist oppression. So there's a lot to do, but I am hopeful because I really believe that although there is this world of disinformation, there is the rise of fascism, there is also these sparks of light and seeds of hope. And care is one of those. And so for me, working at Kōtari Trust Education for Social Change, where we really need to hold on to places like care and Kōtari because we need to educate each other. And in that dialogue and in that accountability where we take the walls down and have relationships with communities who are working for change, that's where academia can offer its treasures by being accountable. Not from the privatisation and commodification of learning, which takes us nowhere. So, this has been an inspiring experience for me being with CARE. And I go back to the forest where I live to learn from the Indigenous community there and to work in that place with a great sense of hope. And I hope that you, wherever you are, will engage in a conversation with me now, because I feel that we can't wait for some blueprint. We have to recognise our own power and our own ability. It's not an individual power. I feel sorry for people brought up under Roger Douglas neoliberalism because it throws everything back onto you as an individual. When I went to university, it cost me $100 a year. I felt like my society believed in me. And individualism cannot solve anything. Even as Warner Jackson always says, individual acts of goodwill will not change structural oppression. And we just need to remember that it's the quality of our relationships that will determine the quality of our rehumanized world. And I guess I learned that from a quote from a Brisbane Aboriginal group that's on the wall in my office, and it says that the quality of our project depends on the quality of our relationships. And the outcome we're looking for is relationship. We're not looking for something else. As social animals, it's our relationships that will actually allow us to stop being ableist, stop being racist, stop being sexist, stop being homophobic, stop being all those things that are anti-life, the death cult of colonial consumer capitalism, if you like, and actually be the humans we were always meant to be, and learn from the people who have still held on to those things. There is tremendous opportunity, but there is also, you've got to stop shopping, people. Yeah, we really do. Our identity as consumers is part of the problem. And, the capitalist system is not going to give you back your power through shopping. We have to take our power through our relationships. So I hope that people might like to engage in a conversation, because that's where the real work starts. And thank you so much for listening, everybody. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. For wherever you are, each one of us has our part to play, and I really need to hear from others so that I can use my voice, because our voices are the most powerful thing we have. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Catherine. That was so beautiful, and you gave us so many things to think through. Let's open up the floor to any questions that we have, including questions from Facebook.
Yes, you've got a question?
Catherine, it's such a privilege to be in the same room as you are and to listen to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question to you is, Catherine, you bring in this amazing context of how you also needed to navigate patriarchy as a part of colonial theft, and I was wondering if you could share something more about your experiences and how, since, as you have spoken about colonialism as a living thing that keeps on mutating. Looking forward, how are you wanting to change or kind of look to new ways of approaching this, or do you think that
A wonderful question, and it's a question in my house every day, because it starts at home. My partner and I have this thing about which came first, patriarchy or capitalism. Clearly patriarchy came first. Both of us think that he should do the housework for 2,000 years because he's got a lot of catching up to do. But I guess I was brought up in left patriarchy, as I said. And so my father was a amazing, dedicated activist Marxist, but at home, he was a dictator. And so these contradictions were very real to me. And, you know, he's gone now, it's his birthday today. I honour my father and everything that he gave me. But at the same time, and I wouldn't be who I was without him, but at the same time, what I learned in that home space was the contradiction of you can go out and have a public life, but at home, you are, don't challenge the dictator. So that is not a helpful contradiction, and yet I think many of us carry those contradictions. In political life, when the SIS were, I'll tell you a really funny story. So the SIS started following me when I was 15. I set up a high school students union, and we protested against all sorts of things. And I got my file off the SIS many years later, and in it, the SIS officers, they infiltrated a meeting where the Communist Party of Wellington was discussing me. And it says, she is, one of the communists said to the other, this is a terrible, foul-mouthed girl, and if I was a policeman, I would have knocked her over. You know, so these are people who are supposedly on the same side as us. You know, like supposedly wanting revolutionary change, and their response to a 15-year-old girl, who admittedly thought she knew everything, was that I should be attacked by the police. And so the SAS had recorded this in hearing this communist guy saying this. I mean, it's pretty funny, and I can't remember saying anything terrible, you know, at this protest. But I think my existence was terrible for them. That I had a voice at all, that a 15-year-old girl thought she could stand up and challenge the power of the education system in the state on the steps of Parliament. That's not okay, even to the left patriarchy. So, you know, that was a good learning for me at an early age, quite apart from my home. And it continues on, like, Parliament is like, 9 years in Parliament, I sat next to people who said things to me like, I said to the National Party MP, you shouldn't have cut that aid to women in the Pacific. And he said to me, at least they shave their legs, Catherine. You know, this is what happens to you when you're in public life and people are trying to diminish you. And I saw this sort of thing happen to Māori and Indigenous people in the Parliament as well, both racist responses by men and women, and also patriarchal. The whole thing at Parliament is so patriarchal. I don't know if you've been to the Parliament. It's directly stolen from England, you know, a failed state, as we can now see, based on imperialism. And they pick up this golden mace, an object of violence, and they carry it in, and they put it down before you can open the day. Every parliamentary session, the Sergeant of Arms, in case you were wondering, it's a military model. If you looked at the Queen's funeral, all you saw was soldiers, because all that the Westminster system is about, the violent enforcement of their system. That's what boarding school's for, to train people, men, to be violent enforcers of imperialism. And so, you know, patriarchy has to go. But in terms of, I have concerns that we have interpreted challenging patriarchy in very unhelpful ways in the West. I don't think we've got the answer, and I can't comment about other cultures except my own. But in my own culture, the idea that feminism doesn't mean solidarity with others. It means we have to, just being female, you have whatever you do, what you like. It's all about choice. And that to me is a co-option by the neoliberal mantra. Choice is one of the most co-option words I've ever heard. And it actually, if your choice is to internalize the oppressor, that's not freedom. And you know, that's where we've often got stuck in patriarchy, is like, women have the right to do whatever they want to do to please the patriarchy that still exists, but we won't call it that because we're feminists and we've chosen to do it. So, you know, that's a dialogue with younger women that I'm interested in having. And there's a lot, there's a lot more that I could say about that, but let's keep going.
Catherine, we've got a question from Facebook.
Yeah.
Leon Salter wants to know, at times it feels like the challenges we face are so huge and insurmountable, while the left is so weak and we seem to be experiencing another right-wing racist backlash through three waters. How do you stay motivated and optimistic?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. I don't think anyone stays motivated and optimistic all the time. I think that's an unacceptable burden to put on yourself. You know, sometimes I don't feel optimistic. But I'm of the biological good fortune where I'm naturally quite an optimistic person. Not everyone feels that when they walk in the world. I have always felt my privilege. I have a lot of privilege. And so if I have a lot of privilege, what am I going to do with it? And so I think there are places and sites of strength and healing for us when we feel that we are in a downtime in terms of, you know, the left and the progressive and the... I look to the Indigenous model and they go bush. You know, the land is there for us, the water is there, the trees are there. I just go, I live in the forest and I just go in there and stare at the river, you know. I think crying is really valid too. I think being human, we need to express the emotional reality of feeling so overwhelmed, but at the same time, what really gets me out of it, apart from the forest, is other people. You know, like being with Mohan, and he's challenging some very tough things, and he's leading some very important work, and he's a loving and inspiring person to hang out with. And so I think, oh, you know, if he can be like this, you know, being with our friend over here who's, your family's in Bangladesh, and Mahbub's family is not here, and he's studying for the greater good for the longer term, and he's not whining about how hard it is. I actually look at my own culture and think we're a culture of whiners because we've had so much privilege. We think it's hard, but it's actually, if we look at our lives, particularly in this country, we have so much authentic power. And I know it's a dark time in many ways, and you spend too much time on social media, you start to feel like, but actually when you spend time with real people doing real things in your real community, where you are, where you live, there are those human moments where spirit speaks to spirit. And we know that, I mean, it sounds really weird, Leon, but I actually believe that love is a force, a real force for change, and that we can actually, the left has been extremely bad at this because we've been so in our heads because it's Western hegemonic thinking, but actually our whole self needs to be present, and really there's some amazing people, and love will actually get us through this. And in this time when we may not be feeling powerful, we may not have a political party that represents our views, although I really like the Māori Party at the moment, and I love some of the Greens as individuals, but while there's no coherent narrative, we need to go back to the basics. So that's the earth, and that's rebuilding from a different place, from a place of care, from a place of justice, and listen to the marginalised people who don't have the privilege of even being in this conversation right now. That's what I'd say. Personally as well, I've got mokopuna, I've got grandchildren. I find, as you get older, I don't know how old you are, all of you listening, but the older you get, the more you realise children are everything, and you know, their life is just, you know, they're just so present, and they deserve everything, all of them. All children are our children. And I get really motivated around that, you know. And maybe that sounds a bit corny, but, you know, we're human. Oh, and I've got a dog as well. She's good. I've got a dog and I like chocolate. And but thanks for your question, because I know that many people are finding this a time of real difficulty, and then the isolation of COVID made it really hard. But you know, that's the thing we really need to, as human animals, we really need to see each other to actually, to get the inspiration. You can't quite do it on the screen, although you can meet people on the screen who you would never otherwise meet. And, Yeah, I do think it's been a very challenging time. But and what is the most challenging thing, if you'll allow me to say, as living with a person with polio who's disabled, is that the capitalist system has said that only some people deserve to live. And as soon as we went from being a team of 5 million, but as soon as the capital didn't, the capital people, the money people didn't like it, we're back to, you know, some people are disposable apparently. And I think that's highly problematic. But you see a society where there is no, the concept of common good and shared responsibility is very easy to break it down into individual choice. You can choose to stay at home for the rest of your life, is what they're saying to vulnerable people. So, you know, that's a disturbing, whakaaro, a disturbing thought process. And that's why, again, we go to look at the Indigenous people, because that's not their view, that you have a society where some people are disposable. That's not the view. That's not how they operate. So we've got a lot to learn. And, you know, I was with someone yesterday who was dealing with multiple complex issues from the colonizer, and is still so positive, still so committed to learning, so committed to giving. And I think if these people can do this, if Māori women can do what they do in this country, you know, I better step up, because it's really not that hard. And it's such a gift to be here and in this place, but it does have its obligations. This country is a colonised country. We got work to do. Thanks for the question.
You know, Leon has another point he's making about the individualist techno-fantasies for fixing climate change, Catherine, and I know we have talked about that. I suppose I wanted to build on that a little bit in terms of the underlying racist ideology that drives that techno-capitalist solution framing, which is sort of the ideology of survival of the fittest, which is that those that deserve to be living, that idea of deservedness, will have access to these technologies that will take us past the climate change crisis, if you will. So I suppose, what would your message be to those in privilege that think that techno-fix is going to actually save those that deserve to be saved, and whether it is going to another planet or whether it is having access to particular kinds of technologies, that they will have the power to actually buy those resources and be able to get past this crisis?
Yeah, I don't even know whether they're the people who are going to understand this, because they're so busy, you know, buying electric cars. You know, this is the problem. Those of us in privilege are treating this crisis like business as usual, and we can buy our way out of it because we think we're going to be the people. You know, Mother Nature, Papa Tuanuku, she has many names and she has enormous power. I don't think they're going to get away with it, because there comes a point where their beachside luxury apartment in the area where I live can no longer get insurance. So that what's going to happen then, and this is happening in my area, is they start screaming for somebody to pay for what they've lost, because they've lived in a world where they feel utterly entitled to do whatever they like to the environment and to live wherever they want, and they have these mansions by the sea, and now the sea doesn't care. It's a bit like COVID doesn't care, you know, whether you believe in it or not. It's like there are forces at play on this planet that are going to take us down, and it will be felt more painfully by the poorer communities, but I think everyone will be affected. And these people, because, you know, they're used to having enormous privilege and wealth, and it's going to be very hard for everybody. And I do fear that will mean they will try and find their safe little enclave and maintain their absolute power and create slavery. I mean, there are many dystopian options in front of us, but we have to, the first thing we have to do, if we're one of that elite, is reject those solutions and actually say no. You know, the Greens, and Jeanette Fitzsimons was my next door neighbour and a good friend, and she always used to say that that the growth cannot continue, and that people have to learn to live with less, you know, what you need rather than having everything. But, you know, to get people to transform their thinking out of neoliberal having more into accepting that you can have a really good life with less stuff, that's the challenge. I do think there's some young people who are up for it. As I said, it'll be a fringe, but the influence of that can be, it can amplify itself way beyond the numbers. So we are at this point where there's a narrative that can go either way, and we really need to put out a narrative that is, we can have a really good life in community by connecting and using less and being aware of our precious resources in a way that we never had before. But I don't know how many crises it's going to take before we get there, or how many people are going to use guns to defend their privilege. And those are the questions. Demographically, this country is in the face of change. It's going to be, by 2050, it's going to be a Māori, Asian Pacific country. It's not going to be a white country. And what I fear is, you know, we're no different from the South Africans. Like, are we ready to be a minority? Because they enforce their minority power. And I really hope there's enough Pākehās getting educated about the nature of this country and their role, and recognising that there's a better life when we share power rather than insist on dominance. And it's the same with climate change. I mean, I left the Green Party really because the climate change policy is too weak. It is about maintaining the farmers' protection, and farmers are essential to life. But I want farmers who know how to live with the land and grow food for all of us without killing the water and killing the planet. And those farmers exist, and we need to amplify their voices. You know, there are not enough of them, but those are the amplified voices we need to hear. The people who can really feed us, and people who we can really work with. You know, the conditions and the contradictions are sharpening, and that can go either way. You know, but we need to have a narrative. We need to have a story. You know, we need to have stories that show what we can do and how it can be different.
I do have a question, if anyone else doesn't want to. Babu, did you want to ask a question? Debelina, did you want to ask? Okay, I do have a follow-up question, Catherine. I love how you centered the concepts of love, relationship, care. And those seem to be connected to this idea of listening, and how do we listen to the voices of those who are at the margins of the margins, who have so much to teach. I suppose the challenge is, and I'm thinking from the space of education and pedagogy, is that the dominant model is one of deficit, which is that you have knowledge, you feed it into communities, and you teach them how to actually find solutions, which is that we as experts are going to bring in the knowledge. So I guess, what is the kind of shift that is going to be necessary to go from that kind of model, that colonial, capitalist, patriarchal model in which we have been educated, into really opening up that space for listening? Because, you know, one of the things that we see continually in the work of care is that as we talk about listening, and the voices emerge, that structures find ways of filtering, meaning that we will only listen to that which is convenient, but we will sort of erase the rest, which actually ask us to transform ourselves.
Yes, and I'll start with the word consultation, right? So my father, happy birthday, he said that consultation was a cross between a con and an insult. If you look at the structure of the word, it's a consult. And it's a con and an insult because exactly what you just said, it's about a selective listening to those, to hear what we want to hear. And so, you know, structural power will always, dominant power over rather than power with, will always try and co-opt people and put the people from the marginalised communities into situations where they are benefiting as individuals and therefore reinforcing the dominance narrative. And that's the thing. We actually need to really learn how to listen by having a relationship. And I see people in the environment movement and in the Kai movement and all that who are doing great work in that space, but I also see people stumbling and feeling like they're getting it wrong because they're so used to the idea that we do things to people rather than with people, and that we have experts. I think one of the reasons I dropped out of academia was because I wanted to live the way I'd never lived. So I went and lived in the forest, and then I was educated by a kuia who taught me about Te Tiriti and racism, and we were doing that on the site of political protest. We were actually fighting mining companies, and she would tell us these things. So it was in a situation of actual real life struggle that I did so much learning. And I think that's true for a lot of people, that when you're involved in real projects and you've got a commitment to action reflection. So for me, as influenced by the great teacher Paulo Freire, it's like you actually have to practice action reflection in all situations. And so whatever we do, there's not much point in doing it if we don't reflect. But if we just reflect and don't act, well, that's what universities have become famous for. And not even for reflection, just for actually making money, for commercialization of knowledge. So yeah, I think in the listening that we need to do, we actually have to get right into real projects with real people about real things, and they dictate what the projects are rather than us. They say, we need to do this, we know what we need to do, will you help us and use your resources, which you do in care, to support what they're doing, and which we're trying to do in our little group, The Basket, or other groups where we have power and privilege. And so, you know, the people that I've worked with that have humbled me the most, I mean, people like the sawmill workers, you know, and they don't know all the flash words or how to deal with a government department, but they know that I work for them, so they can send me off to write that thing. And they know that they hold the truth of the experience in a way that I never can. And therefore we need to follow their lead, because they are leading from that place of absolute experience. And they're the ones paying the price, literally, through their bodies every day. So, you know, for me, that accountability and that listening, you know, we underestimate the power of people all the time. I mean, it goes for children as well. Children hold knowledge. Mm-hmm. You know, lots of people hold knowledge who are assumed not to hold knowledge. I was a youth worker, and, you know, there's kids, they taught me so much about collectivity, about looking after each other, and also about the need to have adults who will set boundaries around toxic behaviour and will say no with love and respect, and also that the system will never do that. And the system sets exclusive boundaries without love or respect. So, you know, we can do that, but it's you know, listening, there are many layers to that question, and layers to the types of listening, and what is to hear. You know, I sat in select committees in the Parliament, and we listened, and then the power structures dictated that we ignored what we were told. You know, and then if people tell you things and you've got no clear value base and no clear understanding of justice, then you can make very bad decisions, even with good intent. So it really is important that we develop an educational commitment to critical thinking. Mm. Without critical thinking, we can't address our own issues of dominance if we come from my culture, let alone hear the voices of people who've got some better ideas.
You know, one thing that this dialogue with you this week, Catherine, has done for me is to really think through a question of critical reflexivity as pedagogy, as you talk about it. Yeah. Particularly in terms of, you know, I'm looking at the UK right now.
Yes.
And it is really disturbing, you know, when I think through my culture and the South Asian culture, right, that you have all these brown-looking Tories,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Whether it is Rishi Sunak or Priti Patel or Sue Braverman, and women brown Tories,
yeah.
Who would make you think that, well, the Indian transformation has come to the UK, now it is the return of the South Asian from the colonized into the space of the colonizer. But people who are utterly instrumental in the perpetuation of a racist, colonial, capitalist structure, and who are fundamentally migrant, anti-margins, which raises a really interesting question about also the sheer vacuousness of identity politics, if you will, that is removed from an anti-capitalist analysis. So I do wonder what kind of lessons we draw in terms of anti-racist interventions, recognizing that so much of that kind of performative anti-racism actually holds up a dominant class of elites who occupy particular identities, whether it is identity as a brown-skinned person, identity as a woman, some mix of that to actually perpetuate the worst kinds of colonial violence.
Indeed. I mean, I think with the question we had about patriarchy and feminism touches in the same space, you know, that I have choices, therefore I'm free. You know, I'm in Parliament representing a political party that has no respect for my culture, but I have succeeded and therefore my culture will benefit. You know, these assumptions that are made every day. And part of it, I think, is in challenging that, it's about challenging that very shallow understanding of identity is who does the challenging. So I think it's important for women to challenge women. And I think it's important for people from the cultures that are being manipulated and used for cultural performativity reasons to challenge their own people. And I think that's why I work in my space of challenging Pākehā. But I do really see this important role, and I see this strongly amongst tangata whenua community challenging each other about tokenism. I mean, one of the things that just slightly to the side but really concerns me is the co-option of Māori tikanga and tokenism in the education system, so that expressions like mana enhancing or Māori enhancing are used to silence debate, but they're not Māori that are upholding those values according to their tikanga. It's the white institution saying we have ticked these boxes, therefore we've met our requirements and don't challenge us about this. And when I say to a class, why are you doing a karakia, you're all Pākehās, did you get asked to do it? What are you doing it for? What is the point of it? Who are you respecting and who are you accountable to? They can't answer those questions. It's just like, well, it said in the paper that I had to do this. Same with pepeha. I must learn to say my mountain, my river, even though I do not have a single spiritual connection to that mountain or that river. But you can see that colonialism and capitalism are so seductive to people who have been marginalised economically. This is their shot, and as an individual they've been captured. And so I feel their own people need to challenge them. I'm not going to be the one that says to them, how dare you, be a Māori MP in the National Party, for example, or the Labour Party. You know, I'm not going to say that. But I will say to my own people, what are you doing about the culture of co-option? And so what's the point of the Labour Party, for example, having a strong Māori caucus, but when I was in Parliament, voting to allow the Peka Peka block in Taranaki, the only Pihimas people, to actually have their land alienated yet again, and people like Dr. Leone Pihima came to us and said, don't vote for it, and my party and me were the only people that didn't vote for it. So, these contradictions are very painful, but they're really, really important, because what is we really have to ask people, what is your ideological position, not your identity alone? Your identity is important and self-defined, but your ideological position is important as well. And one of the things that's hard is there seem to be quite a few younger people who've never thought structurally because they've been told that it doesn't exist. It's almost like Margaret Thatcher has infected the world with there is no such thing as structural society. There's shopping and there's choice, but there's none of that. And I'm like, nah, if you can't think structurally, you can't change the world.
And contemporary racial capitalism, I suppose, is really smart in the sense that it makes invisible its racist nature. So if you look at global tech, whether it is your Google or your IBM, you have all these brown-skinned leaders of global tech, but it is perpetuating sort of a racist ideology that is mired in whiteness, but that is invisible to most of us that see that kind of multicultural identity play out at the level of representation.
Yes, and it's difficult to challenge that from my position because I am the beneficiary of global whiteness. So, you know, I can't be the one that says, but it's like I'm allergic to the words diversity and inclusion. I actually think they tell you a lot. And one of them is particularly like inclusion. What it means is you can be diverse so long as you're prepared to be included in our project, our capitalist colonial project. And then we're going to have, oh, welcome, welcome, you know. We'll include you so long as you play our game. You are very welcome. In fact, you're making us look really good. And I find that highly problematic. And the same with the sort of diversity as a word. It's actually quite insulting in some ways because it assumes there's such a thing as normal people and then diverse people. And what we mean by that really is Western white people. And it's a race, you know, I don't support it. I mean, human resources people are always going on about diversity and inclusion. Inclusion in this country around Te Tiriti is assimilation. And assimilation is not the solution. Assimilation into our toxic and dying structures is not the solution. But it's very hard for people sometimes to see that. And my own culture struggles with it because we're invisible. We don't even think we're a culture. You know, Pākehā people are always saying to me, but I wish I was a Māori. And I say to them, oh, the police are coming. Do you still want to be a Māori? And then they know in their guts they don't want to be because they know what's going to happen if they're a Māori and the police are coming. We need to reality check my culture. I think the questions and the conversation with yours around their co-option into power structure is a different person and a different process. But in my culture, I have to be straight with my people and say, the cops are coming. Are you still think you want to be a Māori? And do you realise that being a Pākehā has X, Y, Z privilege associated with it every single day? That we get this and we don't see it and we don't know who we are and we don't know who we marginalise? So yeah, I think it's very telling what's happening in England, and I think they used the funeral to try and embody their colonial past as a way of looking good and trying to make their people feel like, you know, it's bizarre because, you know, a 96-year-old woman lived a long life, lived enormous privilege and left $500 million tax-free dollars to her family, and we're crying about that? Like, it's a Netflix movie, it's not reality. And yet, you know, the English seem to be so desperate for a sense of identity other than as coloniser. And actually, of course, no one wants to say my identity is coloniser, but when it is, it's just an opportunity to face the truth and to build better relationships.
Yeah, and also the backlash against that, Catherine, was quite powerful, right? So when you had academics, intellectuals from, say, the context of Africa talking about, well, as you're talking about the Queen and remembering her, let's talk about this as genocide and violence, you know.
Yes, I know we're not allowed to, we weren't allowed to because somehow that's disrespectful. It's not disrespectful to not only control your own country but to steal from India its diamond. You know? It's quite sick, eh? I just, you know, I've got English ancestors and we come out of the British Raj and, you know, we, the stories we have told ourselves are violent, actually based on violence. They are, you know, and you cannot base community on violence. It doesn't succeed as a community. So England's going down because they, you know, the best things in England is all the people who come from countries they've colonised and who they're desperately trying to manipulate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, Leon is saying, picking up on that and saying, talking of a death cult, following the Queen's death, they are now killing the poor through austerity and cost of living.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, how long did it take for Liz Truss to change the tax structure to make the wealthy even wealthier? I think that whose lives matter, which I think is what you said, Mohan, whose lives matter, Leon, and, you know, the poor in England have never mattered. I don't know why they've never had a revolution. I mean, the French managed it. It was a bit of a, you know, bloodbath. But, like, in fact, the English need to start fighting, just like we all do, non-violently fighting for stand alongside the poor. But when you talk about middle-class people, because we do a lot of structural analysis of this at Kōtari, middle-class people in economic terms identify with who they want to be which is the rich elite, rather than the people who stand next to them and have so much less. And there are people who identify across the class boundaries and who will stand up. But, you know, we really need to get rid of charity, because charity is a form of colonisation. You know, the government here is constantly giving money to budgeting services, as if that was the problem. I've never seen better budgeters than poor people. They have to be. They have to be the best budgeters to actually survive. But all the money goes to food bank, where you have to go along with your little piece of paper from Work and Income. After your ritual of humiliation and punishment for being poor, you have to go along to Work and Income and beg for, go to the food bank and beg for food. So that's why we've set up the, we're supporting the Te Mana Wahine or Te Wharaki or Te Mana Wahine o Hauraki, set up a shop in our community, and it's called the Pataka Kai, and it's the concept is give what you can, take what you need. And nobody has to hand any piece of paper, and no one questions what you do. And we are liberating food from, my job is to liberate food from the wealthy organic growers and put that best quality food in front of that kaupapa that those tangata whenua are leading, to support that kaupapa. Because these people deserve the best food. Our whole town used to be a garden when they were in control, and now the poor are dependent on, you know, this kind of failed charity model. So we need to do something different, and we need to work together to make sure that that food, at least, it's not food sovereignty, because the land needs to be returned, and land back is not a metaphor. Land back's the conversation we're avoiding in this country. It's not a metaphor. So we've got a lot to do so that those people, I mean, you know, God help the English people. I really, in the English poor, it's just, yeah, it's the consequences of the system and the belief system that is entrenched in their colonial world, capitalist world, and ours.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Catherine. It's been such a pleasure having you with us and this public conversation. I'm sure it will generate plenty of additional conversations, and look forward to your workshop tomorrow with us. Thank you so much.
Kia ora, and thank you.